Yep. All right. Hey, good morning, everybody. I think we want to get started so that we can be respectful of your time and our time. One, thank you all for being here this morning. I know we have an audience that's online as well. Hello, everybody online. It's a pleasure to be here to follow up with our historic West Side 100 plan. And as you all know, this has been a labor of love for our entire community. This actually started a little bit before me when I took council over 2 years ago. And we have taken that format and expanded on it. One of the challenges I think this faces that, and it's faced in the past, is that our community has met, we talked, we have collaborated, and we've met, and we've talked, we've collaborated. I myself, before I was on council, would come down and meet, talk, and collaborate. But nothing would come out of it, right? And it's through a lot of different factors, I believe. Timing has a lot to do with everything, but I can tell you that we are on the right path. When I first got in office, I asked our planning department and our team, where are we with the 100 plan? And we gathered the team internally. You know, it was a big deal for me to make sure that within this building, everybody knew where we were going and what we were trying to accomplish out of our Ward 5 office. And I think that we're at that page, Tom. If you walk around our building and if you say the 100 plan, I think everybody's going to know what you're talking about in our building. And that's vitally important to get everybody on the same page. Hey, Brad, look at this guy. You came dressed for work like you came dressed for work like you were, still here. It's great. Brad Jeremy, who's our former city attorney, who's been instrumental in helping us. Thank you, Brad, for being here. I really appreciate that. And so, a couple of things that have led up to this. We have we had the plan, and then we had to get the action plan for the plan. So how do we get from, okay, great, there's a plan that's been sitting on a shelf someplace, to actually executing, implementing on it? And this is where we are today. With the help of Brad, with the help of Tom Perigo, Lisa, Cathy, some of the other people throughout our entire team, we have hired an outside team. Jamie's here today to help us with to moderate what's happening, but her and her team have literally been amazing, right? The product that you're going to see today, if you haven't already seen it, I think is absolutely positively world class. I put it up against any program or any master plan that I've ever seen in my time against up anybody. And I want to personally thank you and your team for that, and also our internal team, because you guys have really done a fantastic job. This is a plan in action. It's a working document. And the way I see things too is long after I am gone from this position, whenever that may be, this plan should still live and it should still evolve. And the community should say to whomever is in my spot or in the spot of City Hall, where are we with the 100 plan? How can we get an update on the 100 plan? What metrics have we met from the 100 plan? What progress have we made from the 100 plan? And I think that's vitally important that we as a community holds us accountable for what's going on there, because this is not a Councilman Ward 5 plan. This is a community plan. And this is a plan that was bred from the community, that is going to be sustained by the community, and it's going to be something that our kids are going to look at and say, man, remember that time when they talked about the 100 plan and look what they've done now. That's vitally important. I have reached out to all of our federal delegation, all of our seniors and congresspersons, and sent them notice that we are going to be looking to them to tap in for resources for this. As you know, the pandemic has created a very gaping hole within the budget of City Hall. There's not a lot of dollars for capital dollars, but there's still dollars that can be generated through philanthropy and also through federal grants, which we're going to tap into. As well as we have worked with and spoken to our local elected officials, especially Senator McCurdy, who represents the ward in the state assembly. And I know he's been in contact with the governor, and there is an initial thought that the governor wants to be supportive of what's going on in our community. Obviously, they're looking at a huge shortfall as well. They're meeting in the legislature now to talk about that. But I know that within the governor's heart, and I know Assemblyman McCurdy's hearts and others, that they want to find ways to support what we're trying to do within the 100 plan. One of the things that we've added since then, I believe, which is vitally important, is a healthcare resources center within our Ward 5 100 plan. We know coming into the pandemic that, and coming out of the pandemic, that more African Americans have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. Most of that is related to pre-existing conditions, diabetes, hypertension, other factors that are prevalent within our community. We need to find a way to address those issues within the community. And, you know, the goal, at least my thought, and you guys are going to discuss this today, is not to create a UMC quick care where you get sick and then you go to the quick care and you get help. This is an outreach facility that is going into the community to discuss the areas of concern, that host seminars, whether it's, cooking, whether it's, better uses of technology that in the community that addresses that. And I think that's vitally important coming out of this pandemic. And it's raised a higher profile from when we first went into it. So that's very important. I cannot stay with you today. I apologize. I have an appointment that I can't get out of off property, but I plan to be here. You're in great hands with our team. We have really gotten some smart people involved in this, and that's important. So thank you guys once again. I'm not going to take up too much of your time. I can talk forever about this. I'm so excited. Right? I am just jazzed about where this is going. This is good stuff, and I thank you guys for that. So thank you. Come on. So now I want to bring up someone who needs no introduction. She is our former council person. She is our former planning commissioner for Ward 5. She is our advocate for all things positive within the ward, Ms. Brenda Williams. Come on up.
Good morning, everybody. This is a very exciting time because I have lived in Las Vegas most of my life. I attended West Side School in 1949. And so I know the conditions that the West Side has been in as early as late as 1968. We still had outhouses on the West Side. So that's unconscionable. And I've seen a lot of plans. I was appointed to the city council through the efforts of Councilman Weekly at that time. And I was privy to a lot of things because I'm just naturally nosy, so I go through stuff. And I kept running into the West Side plan, the West Las Vegas plan. But I never could find any action plan. So basically what I found is that the plan from year to year actually had been, there would be actually no changes. Some update inserts would have been put on the plan and a different cover on the plan, and it was put back on the shelf. So when I talked to Cedric Creer, Councilman Creer, and he explained to me what his plan was, I said, now, this is a man who has the West Side and Ward 5 as his priority. And that is what we needed. And that is what we have gotten. He has assembled a team that buys into the priority of making West Las Vegas one of the finest and the best in the country. And it used to be, everybody wanted to come to the west side. So, but now when you see what was, I call it in the past because we're moving forward, I'm energized, and I hope that everybody here and in the community, in the Las Vegas community in general, the state of Nevada, are as energized to get things done. That's what we need. We need to move forward. They're great plans, and you have to also not only applaud Councilman Creer, but his staff. His staff is dedicated. There's just none other. Not only to mention that, his ability to assemble outside groups, professional people who buy into his priority, which is to redevelop, revitalize, make our community, which I'm still a member of, a walkable, livable, viable community that we so greatly deserve. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, both in person and virtually online and through our WebEx meetings. My name is Cathy Thomas. I'm the director for the Office of Community Services, which doesn't tell you much, but we will be the department that you get to see a lot of, along with youth development and planning and public works, because our goal is to make sure that we stay engaged in a meaningful way so that voice is always given to the priorities of people who live in the historic West Side. The important thing about the 100 plan is that it really is the people's plan. The genesis of that plan was not out of some department here at the city. The genesis of that plan was community residents working with UNLV to harness some energy to tell the city, be sure you pay attention to these things. Ms. Brenda Williams referenced all these plans that had come before, and some of them were big, significant efforts. There was a national convention here where all the architects and planners came from all over the nation and some international folks. And when they do those big conferences, they choose a project. The project was the historic West Side. Now, on one hand, folks are a little offended, like this, we're not a project, we're a community, we're a neighborhood. But folks came in and looked at the challenges, looked at the opportunities, and created a phenomenal document. And as Ms. Brenda said, it went on the shelf. Nice cover. There was even some 3D modeling, their pictures and charrettes. Folks didn't even know what a charrette was. You ask anybody on the West Side, they know what a charrette is. Been charretted to pieces. The 100 plan said that's great, but we have a vision for ourselves about what our future can be. And so they partnered up, residents, not they, you all, as you're here in the room, you're online, partnered up with UNLV and took all that foundational work. Like, we don't throw our babies out with the bathwater, because it was some good work, but it wasn't work driven by people who live and work in the historic West Side. The 100 plan is the people's plan. And somewhere along the line, we lost momentum for whatever reasons. No finger pointing, no backbiting, no anger, just energy. Like, we're gonna take all that energy and put it behind implementing this plan. Because there are big 8 moves that the residents said, when you do these things, that's the transformative work that needs to happen. So Cedric Creer came into office and the councilman said, what? There's a plan? What are you doing about the plan? And staff as well are nope. You better make it work. What are you going to do to implement what the constituents have told you are their priorities. Well, that lit that fire, right? And so we're here today to do a number of things. Obviously, COVID kind of slowed us down a little bit. Remember, we were having large stakeholder conversations. My team was doing smaller focus groups. If you leave here today and you don't meet Neilani, you might miss it, because one of the things we want to be sure that we do is connect the smaller groups who have consistently been doing the work, so that we align that work with what the larger group of community members have been discussing. Nobody gets left out. Nobody gets left behind. So we want to be sure that you meet key people on our team, because Councilman Prayer and other stakeholders like Ms. Brenda Williams are holding me and my team accountable for not only hearing the voice, but aligning community voice with this work. So that any investment we make of staff time or public dollars, and oh, by the way, it's public dollars. So you get to hold us accountable for the outcomes of this process. So be sure you connect with us, because we recognize that it's the people's plan. And oh, by the way, we're the people too. Like, we have some real vested interests, because many of us identify and are a part of the neighborhood too. So it's a job assignment, but it's personal. It's personal and it's professional, which means we get to bring 100% of ourselves to this work. So when the councilman talked about how excited he is, we're all excited, because we get to bring our whole selves to moving this implementation forward. So we will always, my commitment to you is that we will always talk about equity and inclusion. We've had some smaller focus groups where we're talking to folks about how do you prevent displacement? How do you prevent gentrification? How do you respond to long-standing issues of, just had a conversation this morning about big vacant lots and who owns them and who gets to develop them. Those are ongoing conversations. And we will always have that conversation in the context of equity. What is fair and right and just. And you get to hold me personally accountable if I ever, anybody on my team excludes anybody from this conversation or dismisses your experiences. You get to call me personally and say, yeah, Cathy, you're breaking your promise to us. Because this doesn't move forward if we don't repair the trust between government and the community, if we don't bring the not-for-profit sector in, if we don't bring the for-profit sector in, if we don't expand our notion of who stakeholders are, so everybody is as committed to implementing this vision as we have been to talking about the vision. So we've done a lot of work. We're not going to throw any of it out. It's all been really good work. And thank you to everyone who's been in it for the long haul, 10, 20 years or more. Thank you. Today, we're going to say we're about action. We're not meeting and talking and collaborating and meeting and talking. We are doing, and you get to hold us accountable for that work. And guess what? I'm going to hold you accountable for this work. We are in this together. We are mutually responsible for the outcomes. We are mutually responsible for the shared vision. And we are mutually responsible for the success that we know we can have when we align the talk with the action. So thank you again, especially those of you who've been in for a while. I also want to thank the newcomers. We appreciate people who come to the table ready to do the heavy lifting with us. We appreciate the people who've been here for a long time holding down the fort. So once again, thank you so much. We cannot wait to get busy. And we're gonna release all this pent-up energy and drive this thing forward and stick with it all the way to the end. Some of you have asked for actual hard copies of things, and I will make sure that you can get that. The link for the 100 plan is online. But if you're like me, you're very tactile, you want to turn those pages and write notes. And so we will commit to being sure that if you don't have a hard copy of the actual 100 plan, we will print those up and make them available to you to pick up in the next month or so. I'm going to turn it over now, I think, to Jamie, and we'll get kicked off on getting updated on where we're headed. Thank you so much and enjoy the day.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for those of you who are tuning in online. Before I jump in, just a couple of things. First of all, my name is Jamie Gillis. I have been brought on with the City of Las Vegas to work with the historic West Side community to take the 100 plan, work with the community, work with city leadership, and create a pathway to action, laying out the steps that we have to take to build the foundation that also catalyzes great things in the future. And it has been my honor to do this work. This is an amazing city to work for. I want to applaud the councilmen, the city team, because especially in this tough time, post-COVID, tough conversations across the country about race, racial justice, economic justice. I think it would have been easy for any city across America to say, well, it's great we are working on this plan, but we have to shift our priorities. And this city did the exact opposite. They said, no, this is the priority. So as we'll see here during the presentation, we're going to share with you a little bit about the actual plan and action document, but we also want to make sure we share what is happening, because even in the midst of all of this, there has been a lot of work happening to move plan elements forward. So I want to just start with a couple things. First of all, Commissioner Weekly was supposed to be here with us this morning. He had a last minute urgent meeting, so couldn't attend, but I think he and the staff are tuning in online. So we appreciate his support of this plan. Second, before we dive into the actual presentation, just wanted to share that we are inviting you to submit questions, to submit comments. We're going to go through the plan document and we'll answer all those and take all that input at the end. For those of you who are here in person, if you have a question at any time, we have staff members in back that have note cards and pens. So just sort of wave your hand and somebody will come and bring a note card to you. You can also text your questions to the phone number on the screen or send an email from your phone or your computer if you'd like. And then for those of you who are tuning in via WebEx, there is a chat feature on WebEx. You can send your questions and comments through there. We have team members that are fielding those, and at the end, we will make sure we get all of those answered by the appropriate folks. So without further ado, we want to jump into telling you a little bit about the implementation strategy for the 100 plan. And we start with just an outline of the existing situation within the historic West Side. Obviously, a place that has seen a tremendous and also sometimes tumultuous history, but full of stories. I loved hearing Ms. Williams' story, and I've read many other stories about family members who have shared from generation to generation the thriving, cultural, interesting past of the historic West Side, and younger generations looking to see how we breathe new life into that. I also want to say that we have approached this plan, as you have heard from many of the speakers already, from a viewpoint of action. You know, a lot of traditional planning efforts, when they come into a situation like this, would look at this map and look at it as a massive redevelopment site. But we're looking at it from a perspective of community. What does community need to thrive here? What is it that they want from their perspective? Recognizing if we build up from that foundation, we have a recipe for long-term success. So as Cathy has mentioned, as Councilman Creer has mentioned, as Ms. Williams has mentioned, what we present this morning reflects years of conversation, of engagement, of historical reflection, and it also reflects this moment, this incredibly important moment in our history, a moment to reflect on racial justice, on community healing, on making wrongs right, and on meeting people where they are. So I'm not going to go too much into process and background. The plan does a nice job of laying out some of the things both Councilman Creer and Cathy laid out for us about the tremendous amount of work that has gone into building the strategy for the West Side, from the West Las Vegas plan to the 100 plan created in 2016, and some key milestones along the way, which have led to this moment, most recently with significant engagement of community stakeholders starting last fall to really dive in and dissect the 100 plan, focusing on the immediate action strategies. And when we talk today about immediate action strategies, we're talking about the fact that this is really a phase one approach to implementation. The 100 plan is full of dozens of recommendations and ideas for the historic West Side. The challenge with plans that have so many elements to them oftentimes, and the reason that cities sometimes struggle to move them forward and communities struggle to move them forward, is that finding the starting place can be hard. So our job here was to lay the foundational elements down that catalyze future investments going forward. And when we started our engagement to focus on immediate action, we started with the vision for the historic West Side that was set out in the 100 plan, and then worked with community to focus on some of the key elements that were most important: housing, jobs, food, community, family, and reknitting back together the culture of the historic West Side. And this is an opportune time to move this forward for a lot of reasons that you've heard already. There's synergy and leadership from the city side, from the county side. There's a real commitment to moving it. There is a focus on community-led planning and the idea that there needs to be civic-led investments to make future investment happen here. And there's a real focus on partnerships, which are going to be critical, in which when we talk about some of the work that's already moving forward, you're going to hear about the critical nature of the partnerships to make that happen. So as we started to dive into where we would direct our initial investment focus, we drilled down into 3 core areas. And we're going to take these areas step by step and walk through the specifics of each. So this is a high-level overview of those areas and how they connect together. First of all, Jackson Ave, which is really the historic main street of the historic West Side. And the focus here will be on how do we reconnect community? How do we rebuild this street as a place that brings people together? Second, the Washington Avenue and D Street intersection, which is home to the historic West Side School and will continue to be a place where we create and celebrate opportunity in a variety of ways. And third, the Washington Avenue and H Street intersection, which is the corner of the Manor housing site and adjacent immediately to the Moulin Rouge site, and a place where we can really look to invest in creating housing stability and rebuilding the community with diverse types of housing. From those catalytic investment areas, we then started to drill down into what are the kind of core principles for each area that we're focusing on, which you can see on this slide. And then what are the specific projects in each area that we could deliver that start to meet those core principles and ideas for the site. I'm not going to go through every project on this slide because we're going to run through them here in a moment, specifically going into a little bit of detail on each one. But you can see here that we've started to organize our ideas and cluster ideas together with the focus on building momentum in each of these areas and creating, again, tackling those needs: housing, jobs, food, community, and culture. So we're going to start with Jackson Avenue, and I also want to recognize and acknowledge Gensler, who created these renderings that you're going to see throughout the plan. And again, these are renderings that help to begin to create a vision for the concepts we're discussing here. These are not development plans or specific design plans, but begin to give you a sense of how things could evolve over time. So what you're seeing here is a vision for Jackson Avenue that lays out some of the concepts that we're going to be talking about. So there are a handful of projects in each of these. For Jackson Avenue, we have 6 distinctive areas of focus. The first is to begin to bring back services to the Jackson Avenue corridor. And we are exploring a concept for a co-op grocery and an affordable family housing project at the intersection of D and Jackson. Now, we have started work on this already. We have applied for a federal grant from the USDA to launch the co-op project in partnership with a number of folks, the Culinary Academy, 3 Square, the UNR Extension Office, and many others, with the hopes that we can incubate that project in the very near future and work to develop a permanent home for it on Jackson Avenue, thus creating a cornerstone that begins to create a gathering place, a place to provide a much needed service in terms of addressing food insecurity here, and also introduces mixed use development of a scale that is acceptable on the Jackson Avenue corridor going forward. Second, we're looking at how we address single-family home improvements and infill. Now, throughout this presentation, you're going to hear about housing in a variety of ways. One of the things that we have to acknowledge is that we need a variety of different types of housing. There are people that want single-family housing, that want duplexes, that want to live in larger apartment facilities, have different needs, have families, are aging. And so this plan really works to identify how we bring all of those different types of housing into the community. In this particular focus, we are looking at how we go from on Jackson Avenue from D to James Gay Park and bring both improvements and infill for single family housing into this space. The Nevada Preservation Foundation has recently been awarded a couple grants actually to do this work. And so the goal is for the city to try to work with that foundation to see how we can both bring reinvestment into existing properties and new investment for single family housing to connect what will be the future commercial core of Jackson Ave to James Gay Park. And that's the next project we want to talk about, a reimagined James Gay Park. So we've heard a lot about the park from the community. Obviously, it has been a park that has experienced some challenges in the past. It was gated. It has been hard for the community to access and use. And it's one of only 2 park spaces that exist in the historic West Side. It's a tough environment placed right up against the interstate. So it's the ideal design typically of a park environment is that you have eyes on the park. It's surrounded by activity or by housing or by different types of uses. So in talking with the community, there was an idea of introducing some new uses while retaining the park space. That new uses that could also tackle some other challenges here. For a program that would bring container growing facilities into the park that could produce 2 to 3 tons of food per year per container. That's healthy food, greens, vegetables, herbs, etc. That could be then provided to the historic West Side community, either free or reduced charge, and also served elsewhere. So this is a great example of taking an existing asset and rethinking it slightly for how it can serve community in different ways. We're also looking at small business support. That map you see up there, don't know if I can. So that map you see up there shows existing business permits within the historic West Side and surrounding the historic West Side. And what we found from doing this research, obviously there's very few storefront businesses. There are quite a few small business permits for people operating out of their home. But the idea here is to look at how we can support bringing small business back into the historic West Side. Perhaps some of that is working with existing operators who are doing businesses out of their homes or their garages and getting them into a more storefront presence. The other piece of that, which you'll hear a little bit more about in some of our other slides, is how we can incubate businesses, help people start up new businesses within the historic West Side, and ideally begin to cluster those businesses together on places like Jackson Ave where there's synergy in the businesses working together. Programming and activation will be another key piece of Jackson Ave. Historically, the gathering place of celebrations and festivals, cultural events for the historic West Side community. The community told us they envision that continuing into the future. And there was a great event held back in February, I don't know how many were able to go, called the Love on Jackson event, which is a starting point to try to re-invite people back to come together, to gather and celebrate community on the street. So we envision a role for creating a more constant and continuous stream of gathering and events when we're allowed to gather and have events again on Jackson Avenue going forward. And then the final piece is a project that is actually underway that the community had a lot of input in, and that is creating street improvements on Jackson Ave. And so this project is advancing, it is funded, it is a $5 million project expected to be delivered by the end of 2022. And it'll provide a variety of streetscape improvements from C to H Street along Jackson Ave, and features that were prioritized by the community that include larger 15-foot sidewalks with trees, upgraded lighting for the roadway and the pedestrian environment, and curb extensions at the intersections, which will make pedestrian crossing across the wide streets safer for individuals. So I mentioned several of these things as we went through the presentation, but there are a number of these items for which work is already in progress. So I mentioned 2 grants that have been submitted thus far, both of them in the last month, to the USDA, one for the co-op for $400,000 and one for the James Gay Park urban agriculture site for $500,000. So those grants are in the queue, and we will know by September what funding we've gotten out of them. I mentioned the Love on Jackson event, which was a great sort of starter event, and we have some other hopeful events planned for in the near future to celebrate some additional successes, which you'll hear about in a moment. I mentioned the grants that have been received by Nevada Preservation to work on the housing. And while not immediately on Jackson Ave, when we talk about housing and the diversity of housing types, the city has recently acquired the New Jerusalem church site, and in the coming months we'll be doing community engagement around the repurposing of that site for housing and mixed-use development. So I'm going to pause just a second and put this up on the screen and get a drink of water. Just a reminder that if you have questions and comments, we're here. You can raise your hand, you can text, you can email. If you're on WebEx, feel free to send it in via chat. And we'll continue on. So the next section of the plan is focused on the Washington Avenue and D Street corner, centered, as I said, around the historic West Side School. And this is really an area where we're looking at how do we create jobs, how do we create opportunity, how do we incubate small businesses, how do we look towards the future at the needs of this community and other members other residents of Las Vegas to create a place of opportunity. So the first project is the Workforce Opportunity Center. for which there has been another federal grant, over $6 million grant submitted to the EDA, which is well in progress and looking positive for a brand new workforce development center, 10,000 square foot workforce training center on the site adjacent to the historic West Side School. This is a partnership between the College of Southern Nevada and the City of Las Vegas to provide workforce training for every level of employment opportunities in advanced manufacturing, skilled trades, welding, healthcare, and information technology. So it'll provide opportunities at various levels of educational attainment to achieve skills necessary to create a new career in high wage, high demand industries. Additionally, in addition to that, we've been working with the Culinary Academy of Las Vegas to add new programs, expand their offerings on this campus. The Culinary Academy is currently fairly landlocked on their site and has a desire to expand and look at culinary innovation. What is the changing nature of culinary trades and skills that are needed to address? And so it's a perfect fit to weave into the Workforce Training Center, providing diversity beyond tech and manufacturing and IT jobs to weaving that into food, addressing food insecurity in communities, and also adding on to the urban agriculture offer that's envisioned in James Gay Park to look at higher tech urban agriculture solutions that again could provide food for the historic West Side, as well as learning and job training opportunities, not just for Culinary Academy students, but for the community as well. Immediately adjacent to the historic West Side School on D Street is envisioned a market hall and small business incubator concept. And I put this little news clip on here. Councilman Creer shared this a couple weeks ago after we'd already been talking about the idea to create a market hall environment where you have a space where you have multiple small business bays or spaces where small business startups can incubate together with other small business startups, get support, get training, and we can program it to draw people there and help support these businesses. And this news clip came up just recently about a brand new Black-owned food hall opening up in Washington, D.C. by a young woman there who has been incubating that as well. And I think it's the perfect model for what we're looking to try to achieve here too. So that again is envisioned. We are working on another federal grant right now with the EDA to fund work on that concept. And that grant should be going in about a month. Councilman Creer referenced the historic West Side Healthcare Center. And again, this being not an urgent care center, but actually creating a center that addresses total wellness care in the historic West Side, complementing existing more traditional healthcare providers, but also expanding access to well-being for the entire West Side community. And this center will also be able to focus on addressing longstanding issues of equity around access to healthcare and wellness, as well as targeting some of the specific needs of diverse communities and how we help from a whole body, whole wellness perspective, whole family perspective, from children to the aging population. This, in the short term, is envisioned to be opened in the historic West Side School, and over the long term, as it grows, could obviously relocate to another permanent space of its own somewhere in the historic West Side. As you'll see as we go through this plan, we're really looking at how we can incubate a lot of ideas out of the West Side School and the existing facilities that we have there now, and allow them to grow and find more permanent facilities over the long term. We're also looking at this area, so immediately adjacent where Ethel Pearson Park is currently, looking at the creation of a historic West Side African American Museum. Sorry, that shouldn't say healthcare center in there. And performing arts theater. And so this is a conversation that definitely came out of the community about how we tell the story of the historic West Side, how we celebrate the history of African American culture in Las Vegas. And so the creation of a new museum is proposed there, and partnering with the library, which has a current theater in the library in the historic West Side, but expanding that and working with them on programming to have a theater component to that museum as well. And again, this is proposed for where the current Ethel Pearson park site is right now. We'll talk in a moment about what that means for parks in the historic West Side going forward. And then one more project for this area is just looking at that intersection of Washington Avenue and D Street. So the historic West Side has already seen improvements on D Street itself, but we're looking at, particularly as we add more activity, add more capacity, bring more people to this area, making sure that this intersection is very safe for all modes of users, pedestrians, cyclists, people with disabilities. We need to make sure that we're thinking about how people are getting from the museum to the campus to Jackson Ave and doing that all in a very safe manner. So I mentioned again some of the items that are in progress, a number of grants and funding being explored for this opportunity. There's been a $1.4 million grant submitted to the U.S. Department of Commerce for a inner city innovation hub to look at how we bring innovation, job training and innovation. There has been an EDA grant submitted by CSN for the Workforce Opportunity Center for $6.9 million. There is an EDA grant, there are two EDA grants in progress, one for that Culinary Innovation Center and Market Hall concept, as well as introducing a historic West Side cellular network, which would be able to provide free phone and internet access to every resident of the historic West Side for free. And so that's another grant we're working on right now. And then there are several grants currently being researched for the healthcare center, as well as being able to do work towards the museum and the theater. I also want to share a couple other things. Some of you may have noticed a brand new building in the historic West Side that just went up in the past few months. The historic West Side Technology Training Center will have full-time staff, city staff in there working on historic West Side issues, and will be home to another number of programs related to jobs creation and navigating needs of the historic West Side community going forward. There's a ribbon cutting scheduled for that sometime, we hope, in early September. There's also going to be a historic West Side Informational Design Center. This is a brand new thing that will be opening in the next 2 months. This will be located in the historic West Side School, and it'll be a spot that will be open to the public. There'll be information about the historic West Side, about what's happening in the historic West Side, about this plan, and it'll be a place where people can come in and learn real-time, have real-time conversations about what they'd like to see, concerns, get information about what's going on. And again, we'll be staffed by city support teams. So that's very exciting. It's being built out right now and should be open again about the same time as the ribbon cutting for the training center. And then finally, that bottom middle picture there is of a brand new historic West Side parquee that is going up at the intersection of Washington and D. Which will be a branded signage, digital signage that will allow us to communicate information about things happening in the West Side as well. So moving on to the final section, Washington Avenue and H Street, which again is focused on creating housing stability within the historic West Side. So the first big project there is the Marble Manor Housing Redevelopment Project. This is a project that I believe engagement was supposed to begin happening right around the time that COVID hit. But that engagement will continue on starting later this year and into 2021. This concept calls for at least a doubling of the number of units, affordable housing units on the site, and creating a very diverse mix of mixed income housing. So across the spectrum, while also incorporating some mix of uses on the site. The idea here is to sort of, again, rethink the different types of housing uses and needs that would need to occur, and how you create a community there that also have amenities built in, better park spaces and outdoor spaces, connectivity to other parts of the west side, some spaces for small retail and services to serve the neighborhood as well. And that site, of course, is immediately adjacent to the Moulin Rouge site, which is currently still under the auspices of a bankruptcy trustee. The property is currently in escrow with a private investment group. And right now they're working on gaining HUD approvals and funding to convert the property potentially to affordable housing. We're keeping our eyes very closely on what's happening on that site. There is a vision from the community that while certainly part of it become housing, mixed use, mixed income housing, incorporating some market rate housing as well, that there also is an opportunity to preserve that existing casino license there that would allow for a new type of use on that site that would reflect some of the history of the Moulin Rouge. We talked a bit about what happens to parks and greening. So we're repurposing Jamesgate Park. We're looking at Ethel Pearson Park as a future development site for a new museum and theater. So that means we have to think about how we incorporate park and public spaces all around the historic West Side, which is actually exactly what we want to try to do in building healthy, thriving communities, is create pocket spaces and trails and places to engage and play for all ages in every little corner of the historic West Side. So as we do all of this work, from Marble Manor to looking at Moulin Rouge to looking at Jackson and where we're incorporating housing, we'll always be looking at that with a mindset of how do we incorporate some park or public space as well that has eyes on the park, that is engaging to the community, and that gives people a place to go and enjoy. And retail will be a critical piece of this. So where we're building dense housing, we obviously need to have services to support it. We're looking at retail on Jackson Ave that is community serving. There will certainly be some retail and restaurants within the historic West Side School campus with the small business incubator. And as we increase density and the number of people living around H and Washington, we'll also need to make sure that there are services and small businesses there as well. For all of these small business, retail, restaurant anchors, I think what's important to note here is the focus is on how do we create spaces and opportunities, how do we work with small business startups to incubate local folks to create their own business, thereby keeping money in the economy. So this is not a grand vision where we're going to build big box space and hope that somebody comes. We are creating a holistic approach through creating affordable commercial space, through creating programs and support networks and training to actually be able to grow retail and restaurant and small business from the ground up here, which we're all learning, especially through COVID and what is happening, that localization and the more that communities are supporting those local folks does better in the long term. You can't rely on the big boxes and the big nationals to stay with you in these times, but local businesses can carry on with the support of the community. And then another focus here on some housing infill, much like on Jackson Ave, we're looking at what happens between Marble Manor and Moulin Rouge and the future theater and museum site. And so that little area there provides another great opportunity to do housing infill, to do some neighborhood improvements, to improve gateways into the area, and to improve the area along the interstate too. And then the final piece on this section is looking at those improvements on F and H Street. So we're looking at all the gateways into the neighborhood. What is the experience people have coming in? What do they see? What is the message we send as folks come in? And we're looking at this from a variety of perspectives. We want people to feel safe. We want people to feel engaged. We want people to get a sense of what they're going to experience when they come into the neighborhood. We want roads to be safe for every mode of user, roads and intersections. And so we're looking at the aesthetics and the safety and the physical design of all of that as well in all of those spaces, where particularly in places where we're looking at the more immediate kind of heavier uses coming into the historic West Side neighborhood. So final work in progress report. I mentioned the engagement is to begin soon on Marble Manor. There is a City Parkway roadway improvement project that will connect from Symphony Park to Bonanza to improve the streetscape intersection, which is moving forward. And so there'll be work to make sure that is incorporated into what we're doing here. And there's also a signage project that has happened. There's some new lighted neighborhood signage that is designed by a local artist and resident, Harold Bradford, which you can see a rendering of there, which will be installed later this year at the Martin Luther King Boulevard US 95 off-ramp. So nice depiction there by a local resident and artist, another kind of gateway sign into the community. So there's a lot there. This is our first step, and this is a summary of everything that we are working on. In terms of how we're going to roll this out, the implementation strategy itself, when you have a time to read the document, the entire back section of the report is dedicated to how we're going to make this happen. So there's a very detailed implementation summary in the back that talks about the timeline, the steps, what agencies need to be involved, what partners need to be at the table, funding, what our funding sources are, what policies we need to address to make sure these things can happen. And so I've just tried to capture in a snapshot here the delivery timeline of the projects that we've mentioned, focusing really on what's happening in the immediate future. So where we have opportunity, we already have grant funding for some single family home improvements, both in Jackson Ave and Mount Washington Ave and H area that we talked about. There is a focus on how we work on small business support. So the opening of the new center in the historic West Side, the new building, and many of the programs that are opening up in the historic West Side School are very focused on how we help with small business support, and we'll be growing that program. Continuing on with programming and activation to build community. I mentioned we're trying to bring together a big event sometime in early September to roll out the design center, to introduce people to some of the new programs that the city is facilitating out of the new building, and to talk about what our next steps are on the plan. And then going forward into 2021, things that are already in motion and progress are looking at reimagining that James Gay Park and introducing the urban agriculture and the community farming, the Marble Manor engagement, obviously, and then looking at how we ensure we have good planning for parks and greening, both from parks and open space to street trees and design on the streets as well. And you can see the rest of how it rolls out there. So we've put timelines. Cathy, as she mentioned, she said, we want you to hold the city accountable. The city wants you to hold them accountable. And obviously all of this is dependent on funding, the availability to do it, but there is a lot that can happen and is happening regardless of funding, just in terms of planning and effort with staff and partners behind the scene. And as you can see, there's a lot of work going on with applying for grants and trying to get scrappy in these times when municipal funding is challenged, government funding is challenged, trying to find where those resources are to make these things happen. And then in terms of policies, which I referenced, there's a number of things that have to happen aligned to actual projects to ensure that policies are in place that allow things to happen the right way. So there are a number of things that are happening right now. First of all, Cathy's team has been doing some great work on equity and inclusion and what that means, what's the definition of that, what that means in terms of the city's commitment to the community. And they'll be bringing forward a resolution to the city council to define that and solidify that, which I think is very important as part of this conversation. it sets the tone for how the city engages with the community and how the city invests in the community, which is doing it with them, not to them, and with people and stakeholders working together. We're also looking at how to establish some anti-displacement strategies. Obviously, we all know that when you begin to see investment in an area, that begins to raise prices, that begins to push people out. And so the focus here is really on how to create economic stability for both existing residents and businesses, while also addressing how we welcome new people in the future. We're already working on zoning amendments, and I think Mike said there was a flyer going around that there's a workshop coming up on July 30th on the form-based code from 5 to 6:30. So if you didn't get one of those flyers, make sure you grab it on the way out. This will help, again, this is not a development plan, it will just help ensure that we can do all these things the plan addresses. And we're also looking currently at how to address the liquor license restrictions, which create some challenges in terms of even having new restaurants open up in the area, and how to do that in a way that is, again, equitable and safe for the entire community, but doesn't restrict business opportunities. So with that, I'm just going to close on this slide, and I'm going to invite Tom and Lisa to come up and share some final thoughts before we take questions. But you want to take questions first? Okay. All right. I will just close in my words on this and launch into some of the questions here. But obviously, as we have stated, this plan at the very end holds a commitment to the community to follow through on what's here, and reiterates what Cathy said in her comment. All right. So here's a question, and I'm just going to ask the question, and then I'm going to ask whoever's appropriate to come on up. This is a question about some of the homeless shelters surrounding the historic West Side, and if anything is to be done about those, about the rescue mission. What's the relationship between some of the homeless services and the historic West Side community?
Great question. Again, my name is Cathy Thomas. One of the responsibilities for the Office of Community Services is to address issues of homelessness. So we have been working with our shelter partners so that they can manage the services a little bit differently, so they don't have people queuing up outside for those services. People who need to utilize those things are then brought inside. So there are some reconfiguring efforts happening both at the rescue mission and at Catholic Charities, so we can manage how people queue up or get in line to get those services. The biggest thing that we're working on is really trying to create more housing. So I don't know how many of you know about the Courtyard Homeless Resource Center. One of the challenges often for homeless people not accessing services are the perceptions of barriers. So for example, I guess I should take my mask off, sorry. So for example, to get into some of the shelters, you have to blow in a breathalyzer. And if you're not sober, you don't get to come in for services. Well, maybe the reason you're having problems is because you're drinking, so don't exclude me. But even worse than that, you could have untreated diabetes and blow dirty on a breathalyzer test. The purpose of the Courtyard Homeless Resource Center is to remove any and all of those barriers so that people who traditionally can't get into existing services can come into this resource center, work with the case manager, and start getting connected to those services. So in the short term, those are the two things: helping those existing service providers reconfigure how they bring people in for services so that they don't sort of queue up all through the neighborhood. Second thing, establishing the Homeless Resource Center so that people experiencing homelessness who can't get into traditional partners actually have a place to go. And I'll say this at the risk of annoying some people. One of our challenges is that people who do not live in the west side come into the west side and set up street feeding. So there are folks along D. McWilliams under the bridge who come from as far away as Pahrump and set up street feeding. They pack up and go home, and we all have to clean the trash up, have to figure out, you know, what to do about the contamination left by excrement and whatever's left there. So I want to encourage us as a community to think a little bit differently about how to address food insecurity. I know folks are well-meaning, but the aftermath of street feeding is that people experiencing homelessness just then start camping out because they know the street feeders will be back the next day. And I would rather us look at longer-term solutions rather than giving a man a fish. Let's teach him to fish, and so they can get on a path to self-sufficiency. So we know that's a long-term challenge, and I don't know that we have community-wide agreement about whether or not street feeding is a good thing or not. But specifically in some of those areas I just mentioned that impact the historic west side, those street feeders actually don't live on the west side. And there are organizations who come from outside and create issues, and then they leave. So I'm open to suggestions about how to engage around street feeding so that we have a longer term solution that's sustainable and that doesn't have that unintended consequence of people now just setting up encampments because they know the street feeders are coming back.
Thanks, Cathy. All right, we had two questions come in from two different people about saying, regarding a community greenhouse, are you familiar with the Grow House in Denver, which actually Lisa, Cathy, Tom, and Councilman Creer, when they came to Denver, which is where I live, I took them there. Unfortunately, it was a blizzard the day they came, so they didn't get to see the full operation. But just in summary, what the Grow House is, it's a nonprofit organization that was set up in an old warehouse in one of our most economically disadvantaged neighborhoods in Denver. And it has two parts to it. One is an urban ag growing facility, so they have hydroponic grows, regular growing facilities, community gardens, but then they also have a store. And people who live in the zip code that this grow house is located in can get reduced price or free produce and goods for that store. They do both fresh produce and other packaged goods. And other people can shop there, but they have to pay a higher price if they're outside the zip code. So what that does is provide opportunity for the locals and provide resources and revenue from people outside who want to support the local community. And that's essentially the model we're looking to create with the co-op and the urban agriculture facilities that we have proposed here. A little bit different concept, but the idea may come together in much the same way. So Grow House is Grow and then HAUS if you want to Google it. It's a really cool project in Denver. Another one, this is a statement. Regarding James Gay Park, it says it has not been hard to access. It has been closed for 6 years with no plans to reopen. I believe I said hard to access. So I just want to be clear, the focus here is on the future of how we do reopen it in a safe and inviting way for everybody in the community and how we activate it in a new way that keeps people engaged with it and coming and going and using it as a real community gathering and learning space. Okay. It says here, I don't see plans for an actual community center. Are there any plans for that? Anybody want to comment? I mean, that's certainly something we can have a discussion about. The question is, are there any plans for an actual community center?
Part of the repurposing of the old Greater New Jerusalem site that we will be getting community input is for it to be a multi-story building that not only includes accessible housing, but also includes some community space. So part of the community engagement is who owns or controls that community space. Is there a not-for-profit entity that could be responsible for that? And what's the relationship to the city. So we still have some engagement work to do around that, but it is our intention to create community space, specifically at that site. In addition, as we're looking at the expanding the Performing Arts Center and establishing a museum, there are opportunities for community space in those facilities as well.
Oh, one of the things that we also are looking to do, we're working with the Clark County Las Vegas Library District to create a new library in our community. The West Side Library is just way too small and doesn't provide enough access and amenities for our community. So we are looking to bring that potentially in combination with the Art Museum, have that with the Performing Arts Center, with the new library, which will have programming space for the community. Also keep in mind we still have Doolittle, and even though we have the Pearson Center, which is there, which is run by the county, that's on the city land, we have a number of facilities that are there that are able and capable for community gatherings. And also within the West Side School, there's space as well that is available to be used for community gatherings also. But the library's big, and we have been in conversation with them. They are on board, we're on board, we're figuring it out. Thanks.
So, Jamie?
Yeah.
Hate to interrupt. I have a growing list of online questions. We can start going
Great.
through.
Why don't you jump in?
I'll summarize. One of the quick questions is, will the presentation be made available electronically? Some requests for the presentation to be emailed, and also a recording of this meeting.
Yes, both will be available, and we can follow up since everybody is registered. We can follow up. Lee will follow up with information on how to access that.
Okay. Next question: will minority architects and engineers be involved in the planning and design of various facilities, performing arts, museum, theater, library, multifamily housing, etc.?
100%. Yep, absolutely. We'll make sure that diversity across the board is part of every process that occurs.
Okay. What impact has COVID-19 had on the timeline and resource allocation for the plan? Have there been any impacts on the critical path for development?
Lisa, do you want to speak to that?
Hi, I'm Lisa Morris-Diller, Chief Community Services Officer. Honestly, I think that COVID slowed us down a little bit, but as Jamie alluded to a little earlier in the presentation, it also brought about some opportunities because there was additional federal dollars that became available. So we've seized on that opportunity to expedite a lot of the work.
One more. How are you working with businesses and community organizations who are attempting to provide solutions to the initiative in the 100 Plan? Grocery store, food desert. There are already organizations implementing solutions. It seems like we're competing with the city to provide such solutions.
Yeah, let's introduce Neilani. And I also want to just say to that one of the things we're doing on all of these grant initiatives is we're reaching out to partner organizations. So I mentioned, for example, on the co-op grant that we wrote, 3 Square was the lead applicant. The city partnered and did a lot of the heavy lifting on some of the grant requirements. And then we have folks like the UNR Extension Office partnering. Same on the grant we just submitted with for James Gay Park site. City was lead applicant, Culinary Academy was the co-applicant. Many partners who are providing food services across the city were also co-applicants. So the idea here is not to reinvent the wheel or get the city in the business of doing something. The city's trying to be an organization that brings a lot of partners together, leverage resources and leverage expertise to deliver projects more efficiently.
So I wanted to make sure everybody met Neilani Aki, gets to see her face, both in the room and online. So one of the things that COVID interrupted was the community engagement process that we began. And so we have every intention of trying to connect with as many existing community-based groups and interested stakeholders as possible, and then COVID hit. So we have done a number of groups already. In fact, we started last summer when we brought NeighborWorks, thank you, did some 2-day workshops, brought NeighborWorks in to facilitate those for us. One was focusing on not-for-profits and stakeholders, and the other one specifically was targeted to the community of faith, because we know the churches are such a critical part of redevelopment and revitalization on the historic West Side. COVID hit, and so a lot of our traditional engagement methodologies are about getting together in rooms face-to-face with folks. And so today we're trying this hybrid model, and we'll be moving forward with that. So we will push out through anyone who's registered here and every other method when we restart or jumpstart that process again. But I wanted folks to know who Nailani is, because she's the administrator for our neighborhood revitalization and community engagement, and a lot of her team members are here collecting your questions today. She's awesome, and she's radical, and you know, like only First Nation people can be. You know, my Hawaiian sister here is about it. So I think you all will enjoy working with her. Her perspective is truly grassroots, but she understands sort of the administrative, bureaucratic stuff. And so thank you for that question. This is the inflection point, right? Where you hold us accountable and we hold you accountable, like the mutual responsibility for how, when, and where we communicate. This is it. This is the inflection point right here. And so if I don't know you, it's okay to call me up and say, hey, I got a group of folks doing X, Y, and Z, because we want to know who you are. We want to work with you. And might be taking too long, but I want Nailani to talk about the Neighborhood Partnership Fund as a tool that community groups can use to engage.
So I'll give a 2-minute on the Neighborhood Partnership Fund. It is an opportunity for folks to come together and create a community project for, and it can be about anything. Right now, we're already in the process, so it may actually have to wait until next year. However, it is a good starting point for you to start thinking about what kinds of changes, what kinds of projects, events, gatherings that you'd like to put together for your own community. So that's NPF, and exactly what Cathy said. We are here to hear from you, to listen, to be part of the process. We really want to do this together. So any way we can do that, that'd be awesome. If you have Lee's contact, anybody else's contact information, you can absolutely get a hold of me as well. So if you are unable to get a hold of Cathy, please feel free to reach out to me as well. Thank you.
And a question to dovetail on that, who can apply for grant monies and what is the process? Thank you.
Cathy. So depends on the grant. Depends on the purpose. If they are federal grants like the Community Development Block Grant dollars that we push out into the community, we are typically looking for not-for-profit entities with a little bit of a track record. Those applications go out in the spring. It's an online application process through something called Zoom Grants. Again, everybody that's registered online for this workshop will get added to our email blast, so you will know when that particular grant becomes available. The Neighborhood Partnership Fund grant is a matching grant. It's $5,000 maximum. It's very, 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 very easy to apply for it. And you just need to be a neighborhood association or a homeowners association. You don't need to be a formal not-for-profit with a board and all those things. You could just be a neighborhood watch group or some group that wants to throw a block party so you can meet your neighbors. Very low barrier. Some of the other types of grants that are pass-through grants where we might award contracts, like our lead hazard control program that we're looking to really expand our minority and women-owned businesses. And that there will be a request for proposals, which is a more complicated process. We will always provide technical assistance for any type of grant that we push out, and how you apply and the requirements actually depends on what kind of money it is. So obviously federal grants have many more requirements, and we actually have to monitor those. Whereas a neighborhood partnership fund grant is really basically general fund dollars that is made available to constituents. So again, my name is Cathy Thomas, and I would say that. So if you have other questions and you can't get a hold of Lee or anybody else, they'll find me at City Hall and get those questions to me, and I can direct you to the right place.
Thanks, Cathy. I just want to make a note, it's 10:22, but we're going to continue to take and answer questions as long as questions keep coming in. So we'll go a little bit beyond that 10:30 timeframe. Next question I have is, do you plan to demolish Marble Manor? So I will respond to that by saying the Housing Authority is the one leading on that project, and the intent is to incrementally demolish while rebuilding. So if you have a copy of the plan and you go to the Marble Manor page, there is a case study there about Yesler Terrace, which is a great project in Seattle in which they did just that. They essentially rebuilt, took down old housing, rebuilt new housing, and all of the people that were previously living in the housing were rehoused temporarily while the housing was being built, and then were given first preference to go back into that housing. So that would be the intent, to not displace, but to slowly, incrementally rebuild.
And Jamie, if I may add to that, I have a response from Chad Williams. This goes back to the community center. Chad states from the Southern Nevada Regional Housing Authority, the Marble Manor redevelopment site is envisioned to have a community center and cultural center.
Great, thank you. Next question, in light of the current social and civil rights movements taking place in Las Vegas and across the country and world, are there any plans to rename streets such as Jackson and Washington Avenues? Will they be replaced by trailblazers from the West Las Vegas community? Street renaming is in our plan in the implementation, in the policies section. And I'm sorry, Councilman Greer had to leave because this is something he has been talking to us about for a long time. So I think the answer is yes, there will be a public process that occurs to have a conversation about street names. And in the meantime, I know there's work being done to look at what costs would be incurred and how we could cover those costs, potentially another opportunity for us to apply for even some grant funding to support that work going forward. Anything else to add from the city team? Next question, and this may be a Kathy Nailani question again. How will this initiative work to recruit and retain younger people and professionals to be engaged in and to maintain the work and actions going forward?
So we actually have already begun that work. We had a small focus group with some millennials and asked them how to build on that conversation, and then COVID hit. So our intention is to really work very grassroots, pull folks together, have conversations, snowball that conversation in a larger way, and then look at how to align what that particular segment of the community sees in terms of implementing the Big 8 moves. So we're not creating a separate plan that is generationally based, but the questions we asked in the focus group were, and here's the criteria for being included, by the way. So you either currently live in the historic West Side, you work or own property, or you have a familial connection, right? A lot of people's grandmothers raised them on the West Side. Now they moved out to, Summerlin or something. One of the questions we asked was, what would it take for you to come back? What do you need to see? Because you already have an affinity for the community, but you don't live here. So that was one of the questions we asked. And everything needs to align to the big 8 moves that have been already identified by the community who participated in the initial creation of the 100 plan. So we are starting with focus groups with folks in a specific age range who meet that criteria, and we will snowball that forward. Clearly, we're going to be doing more virtual meetings in the era of COVID, but we've already started that process of very specifically looking at young adults who are under 30.
I'm going to join a couple questions together here. So we have a question about the New Jerusalem church demolition and why it's being demolished, and a little bit more information on that. And it related to that, a question about incorporating into the plan the integration and revitalization of the church corridor, which brings so many people to the west side each Sunday. Maybe you can hit on both.
So, the Greater New Jerusalem Church actually has been very badly vandalized. So the interior of the church, literally, the sinks have been ripped off of the wall, the hot water heaters are gone, there are no AC units. So between the time the church vacated and the time that it was turned over or acquired by the city, vandals broke in to steal all the wiring out of the walls, and so they damaged the wall. They pretty much did a lot of work to tear the inside of the church up. The current demolition schedule is scheduled to come down this year. And the reason it takes time to do that is because we do a process with the State Historic Preservation Office to determine whether or not we can or should try to salvage a building because of its historical significance, or if structurally it can be repurposed in a way that frankly serves the aim of the 100 plan. And this particular case is an opportunity for us to develop some workforce housing because of the number of parcels in that portfolio. We are able to assemble a significant enough lot, if you will, in order to do some accessible and housing at different price points. And one of the things that the community lacks is enough housing at different price points so that people who want to stay can stay and people who want to come back can come back. So yes, this church is slated for demolition this year. It could not be repurposed for housing, which was a key thing that has come out of a lot of conversations. And what was the other part? What about the other churches?
Just about incorporating revitalization.
Thank you. So we have had off and on conversations. If you ever look at a map of the focus area, you will see that quite a bit of the vacant parcels are actually owned by the churches. We've been in off and on conversations. I think we're now at a point where we want to have that conversation as a collective, because if you look at the potential redevelopment power of the community of faith simply based on the assets that they own, it represents a phenomenal opportunity. No, we don't have a specific plan around restoration or revitalization because we haven't had that full conversation yet. If those stakeholders prioritize that, we can support that. What we have heard in individual conversations has been around parking lots and housing. It has not necessarily been around preservation. Little known fact, and I tell people this and they don't believe me, the city did not aggressively seek out to purchase New Jerusalem. A realtor brought that opportunity to the city. I tell people that and nobody believes me, but that's okay because it's the truth. We did not set out to buy and tear down a church. However, when the opportunity presented itself, because of its proximity to the historic West Side School, we thought, what an awesome opportunity to do some workforce housing, because we knew we were going to put some workforce development opportunities with the site that's adjacent to the school. So you have all this training and development there. You can actually now provide housing at different price points so that people who are training and working in the neighborhood now have an option to live in the neighborhood. So we're open to those conversations. We don't have a strategic plan that says do X or Y with the churches, because a lot of that land is held by the churches and not by the city. But we welcome the opportunity to have a collective conversation and move forward. Again, all aligned with the big 8 moves of the 100 plan, because that's the people's plan.
I think you're good. Okay. Next couple questions are about the Moulin Rouge site. Thank you. And there is a question that says, doesn't the city own the Moulin Rouge site? It was on the agenda this spring for to maintain the still active gaming license. The city does not own the Moulin Rouge. It's owned with a bankruptcy trustee, I think is the right terminology for that. But certainly is keeping its eye on what's happening with that site and has a great interest in making sure if and when it is redeveloped, it's in the best interest of the community. The second separate question that came in says, why does the city of Las Vegas, why is it appropriate to surround the Moulin Rouge with the housing authority property, and why are they not held in the same regard? I think this question is referencing affordable housing, the future of the Moulin Rouge, what that looks like. And I think perhaps the best way to answer this is just to say that when we have been looking at both of those sites, of course, talking to the housing authority, talking with the community about their vision for Marble Manor, for Moulin Rouge in the future, there's always been a discussion on the table about how to look at all of those parcels as one big site and think about how you would redevelop it in a most sustainable way. So that means different income levels of housing, mix of uses, commercial uses, community serving uses, paying respect to the past of the Moulin Rouge, and looking at creative ways to reinvent that for future uses. So I don't think that there's anything predetermined about either Marble Manor or the Housing Authority, the Moulin Rouge site. But the Housing Authority will be doing engagement starting next year about at least that piece of it, and we'll see how that ties into what happens with the Moulin Rouge. Anything else to add to that? Or okay. There was a question here about street improvements and why they couldn't have been done during COVID shutdown. I think the only street project that's currently funded and far enough along to do would be Jackson. Is there somebody here that wants to answer that? Or okay, all right, great. Mike's going to come up and tackle that.
Everyone. Mike Jansen, I'm the Public Works Director. As it relates to COVID, there were some projects that we had in the queue citywide where we've taken advantage of an opportunity for low traffic volumes, such as work we're doing right now on Las Vegas Boulevard between Stewart and Sahara. The Jackson Avenue project is our project that we have most far along in design, but it is not completed yet. So it's at about a 30% design level where we secured the preferred alternative from the community, and we'll be advancing that design from 30% to final over the next 12 months. And as was indicated earlier, the plan is to have the construction completed by the end of 2022. So hopefully that answers the question as it relates to Jackson. And again, that's the project that we have most furthest along. I think also it might have been mentioned earlier, another large project we have under design right now is Lake Mead between the I-15 off-ramp and Simmons. And so there's a number of projects that we have going on citywide, but the ones that are ready for construction, we've taken advantage of the reduced traffic volume where we could, but there's only been so many that were in that position. So again, hopefully that answered that. Sure.
Answer. Another question is, what are the plans to incorporate public transportation, trail systems, just to make sure that the historic West Side is connected to the rest of the community going forward? And I will just say, and then hand over to you, our plans do call for in the policy implementation matrix in the back of the strategy, We do talk about doing an assessment of public transit and looking at public transit needs, particularly as uses increase, as density increases, or more people are using the west side. And also as part of that parks project, that would incorporate also looking at trail systems and making sure we're connecting in. But I didn't know if you had anything else to add.
Sure, a couple other points on transit side. So for Southern Nevada, our transit provider is the Regional Transportation Commission. They're the primary agency that's been allowed through the state legislature to provide transit services throughout all of Southern Nevada. And so we work closely with them when there is a request from a community for service changes to be different frequencies, different headway, adding stops where maybe a stop doesn't currently exist. But where the city's been involved on the transit side is, you might have heard we were one of the first agencies in the country to test an autonomous shuttle, a smaller transit vehicle, kind of commonly known as microtransit. And it was a very successful trial where we were able to get a partner that funded it. It was run on Fremont Street. And what we're looking at right now, working with our federal partners, is there an opportunity to soar a grant to do another microtransit project that would have an autonomous type shuttle or something similar. And the historic West Side would be a great location to try to implement a project like that. So I would say stay tuned. We're looking for those opportunities. I think, as Cathy had mentioned earlier, if there was something positive to take out of this coronavirus pandemic, is it has opened up a lot of new opportunities for federal grants. And so, again, we're exploring those and seeing where they may be applicable for something like a transit upgrade.
And we're going to go back to Mike Howe for some online questions.
So real quick, I'm going to make a two-part question. Will the healthcare center offer holistic practitioners so residents have access to low-intervention healthcare options? And then the second part, implicit bias in healthcare has been tremendous and well documented. How will the providers be selected and vetted to ensure that they have the best interests of the Black community in mind?
So I just had a conversation with my boss that this our approach to this particular place is not a traditional healthcare center, because we already have Volunteers in Medicine, we have Nevada Health Centers over there on Mount Moriah. This is a whole health complex. So we will absolutely be looking at traditional, contemporary, holistic health, because we want to deal whole mind, body, spirit, whole health, whole wellness, actually. And we will absolutely be looking at a primary importance for the operator, or whomever that will be, and it'll be a vetting process, is cultural competency. That whoever is providing care understands health disparities. They understand cultural norms and mores about accessing health care, particularly mental health. That they take an integrative approach that looks at nutrition and meditation and all kind of allied and ancillary health care. So we absolutely intend to have this be a whole person health care complex, as opposed to traditional Western only focus, that it is a complementary care so that you can get Western care. But if what you want is traditional herbalism or Chinese acupuncture or whatever to complement that you have that opportunity. And so we're still very early stages. We haven't even identified what the location could be for that. So there will be lots of time to get input. And we want to consult with our ancestral healers. Like, there are folks who understand things that we need to incorporate. And so it's important that we have that conversation before we even do schematics for the building, because this is going to be a build to suit. We need to build it so that it serves its intended purpose. So it might not even look like a traditional healthcare center. I just don't know that yet. But I literally just had a conversation with my boss about the execution of this so that it is not what we traditionally think of as a healthcare center.
So real quickly, Cathy, while I have you there, This one goes back to New Jerusalem. Will you have a focus group before you begin planning the housing development on the New Jerusalem site? The size and scope of the rendering presented at the community meeting last year appeared to outsize the surrounding community.
Indeed. So we did have a rendering where I had people dot vote. If you liked it, you put a green dot. You hated it, you put a red dot. It was literally 50-50. 50% loved it, 50% hated it. That does tell me that I need to have more conversation about it. One of the things that's really important from a historical perspective to know is that the historic West Side used to have 5-story buildings. If you look at the old Cove Hotel and edifices like that, there was a time when the development on the historic West Side was more dense. And so I am proposing that we move in that direction again. If the community says absolutely not, then we don't move that way. So yes, there will be more conversation. The proposed, it wasn't even a proposal, it was a conversation rendering literally 50% divided. 50% hated it, 50% loved it. Tells me we need to have more conversations before we move forward. So the short answer is yes.
Excellent. So one more quick question. What about the Walker African American Museum? It was in the 100 plan.
So there is a committee, and I probably should kick this to Jamie because,
So there is going to be a group. Part of what we were actually trying to schedule when COVID all hit was a focus group conversation, bringing in some museum experts who understand the details, the intricacies of pulling together what a museum looks like, how it gets funded, how it gets operated, how community is engaged in determining what goes in it. And the Walker would be included in that conversation. Unfortunately, we were literally in the middle of scheduling it when COVID hit and the city went into management mode for that. And we've been focused on finishing this up as we move into implementation. So that is on our to-do list. We have a team meeting this afternoon, and it's on our agenda to talk about how we reignite that conversation. And so that will be incorporated into that discussion.
And a quick one about the partners. Everyone mentioned our big organizations. What about smaller organizations that are on the ground doing the work now?
So, and Cathy may want to speak to this too, or Neilani, but certainly I think part of what we are doing here, again, I want to reiterate that this is not a city-driven, we're going to push this through with the city's own perspective plan. What's been presented here are the concepts that we need to now put details to. Who are all the partners and people, organizations and nonprofits and for-profits that need to come to the table? And I say that very importantly because it's going to take all of those people at the table to make these things happen. So Cathy's team and Neilani and the work that they've been doing on the ground to engage and get to know all these groups, get to know where they want to be plugged in. We're really just at the early stages of that because we've been so focused on getting the strategy laid out and what can be committed to in the next 5 to 7 years or so, how we're going to even think about funding and assembling these projects, that is really the work to be done going forward.
One more. Oh, sorry.
Just piggyback really quickly. So if folks online right now, if you are a member of or a representative for some of those small organizations who are doing the work, could you shoot me a contact name and number? So one important challenge will be for us to know who's there. By the way, I appreciate that. That was one of my critiques. Like when you talk about stakeholders, let's define that very broadly. Help us know who you are. So if you're submitting questions online, give me a contact person so that Neilani and I can be sure to follow up so that we are sure to engage the appropriate people in the different discussions as we move forward. So help us know who you are, and if there are other folks that you think we should be talking to, send us that information too.
Okay, I think we need to kind of wrap up the discussion. There are a number of questions that haven't been answered yet, And we will work to pull all those together, both from online and here, and get responses to those. I just want to quickly say, you know, there's some questions about how we'll accommodate for housing for different types of groups, from young people who want a studio to elderly people who have special needs. A lot of questions about housing types, how much housing we're looking at, so we'll target that. Question about how we got to the final projects in the implementation plan, so we'll address that. And then just a lot of other individual questions about connecting into some other work that's already going on. So that's something we'll talk about, making sure if we haven't already had those conversations, we definitely will. And with that, I want to invite Lisa and Tom up to just say a few words and close this out.
Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Paragon. I'm the Executive Director of Community Development. That means that it's my honor I get to work with Public Works, with planning, and with building and safety. And years ago in my career, I worked on those plans that Brenda referenced when she first got up here and talked. And I remember I did the update to the update to the updated plan in the 90s. And one of the reasons those plans didn't go anywhere, and then the one Cathy mentioned, was a really good plan from all these experts that came in. But the city as an organization, in my opinion, wasn't ready to move that kind of bold idea or those visions forward. We were, you know, an organization like many organizations with silos, and we just didn't coordinate. We didn't grab the talent and the knowledge and the ability that we had, put it together to make something happen in these communities and to follow up on these plans. It's different today. There's been a lot of hard work and a lot of leadership in the city of Las Vegas to bring this organization together in a way it's never been. And it's really great to be a part of that. And like Cathy said, we are excited. And the team that's been working on this is excited. And I've got text messages as late as 11:30 last night, going back and forth preparing for today. But it wasn't just last night. It's been like this all through COVID. This team has been working hard weekends and evenings, and to the point where sometimes I have to turn off my phone because I can't get any sleep. It's been really incredible. And it's the reason that the people at the city are at the city. This is the stuff that excites us. The last 3 months has been a grind. I got to be honest. It's been really hard working through COVID. But it's the stuff that we do because we're professionals. We've done everything we can to secure the city through this hard time. But getting to work on this again, it's the stuff that we get up and we're excited. We can't wait to get into work. And I'll kind of change what Cathy said. We're excited to do the work. It isn't work. It's excitement. It's our passion. It's the passion of the community. It's what makes us a great document and what makes us all excited to be a part of it. And we're really excited for all the participation we've had as well. We have no choice but to succeed this time. There's no question about it in my mind.
So to everybody that joined us today, whether in person or on WebEx, thank you so much for joining us. To those of you who have been doing this work and continue to do this work, thank you so much. And for those of you who want to get engaged, please use the email address and send that information. I think it's really important that as we leave here today, we think about one thing. You know, we need to be united in this work. So when I still hear people saying, what about me? If you know somebody that's saying that, by all means, please, if they haven't sent their own name in, you send their name in. Because I want to get to a point where we can all say that we're working together. It's really important in this particular community in general, that as we're going out and seeking funding and doing all that, that we have a very, very united front. So I want to thank everybody who's doing that work. I think oftentimes people think the city knows every single person that's out there doing something, but we don't. We wish we could, but we don't. But what we do know is by us having these types of forums, we will get to know everybody that's doing that work. And there is a seat at the table for everybody. So just remember that. The other thing, I just want to reiterate that in this plan, as you saw, there's a lot of hard work that went into this. One of the things that I think separates this plan from other plans is the fact that you saw all those grants and funding sources that we are going after. That was really important to not only us, but the team. The community said up front when we first started our discussions, okay, this is not going to be just another chat session, right? And they started asking the hard questions and putting us on blast in terms of where are we going to get the funding. And as I indicated, there's a lot of resources that are out there, not only from the federal resources, but other foundations and a lot of other people that were brought to the table. For those of you that were in those roundtable sessions, you'll notice we had very wide private sector support, and that's what it takes. This is not about government-led, and it's not about the government. I see my friend Katie over there nodding her head. This was about bringing those private sector partners to the table and introducing them to all of the opportunities that exist in this community. And I have to tell you, they walked away very excited. They then told somebody else who told somebody else. They still want to remain engaged. We thought it was going to be like just them coming in and helping that one day. And so this is continuing. The other thing is, I know the museum gets brought up quite a bit. There is going to be a working group, as you heard. We are really excited about that opportunity, not only for the historic West Side, but for the broader story. Many of you probably remember that we did win the All-American City Award, and part of that was the story of the West Side. That was very significant to them. And so I think that we owe it to ourselves and the community to keep going down that road. And then all the attendees are going to receive an email about where the plan is going to be posted, how to stay up to date. I encourage you to stay engaged. One of the things is we will continue to send updates. If there's something that's going to be at a planning commission meeting or a council meeting, or if we have another forum, please come. It is important for the councilman. I know Commissioner Weekly had a staff member here, but oftentimes when we bring these things, there's 2 or 3 people, and then you might have some folks that are against or whatever, but we never have enough community support, and you really can't undervalue that. I know Ms. Brenda knows that as a former councilwoman, but please stay engaged and let your voice be heard. And the other thing is share, share, share. This is not the end. This is the part of the journey. So if you think of another question, use that email address. That email address will continue, and then we can incorporate any questions or get feedback to you. I know sometimes when you hear a lot of information, you don't always think of every question you have to ask. But we would prefer you ask it here and us not see it somewhere like on social media or things of that nature where we don't have an opportunity to answer those questions. So with that, again, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you so much to Jamie. Thank you to everybody that has put incredible amounts of work into this. Again, this is a passion for me as well. Been with these 24 years. I've been working in the historic West Side most of that time. And we're going to make this happen. So thank you.
Team, are you able to put the slide up with the email and phone number again, just so folks have it? Oh.